All right, good afternoon, folks, and welcome to our first webinar of the school year, Back to School with the Middle Years Development Instrument, Promoting Resilience Through Important Adults at School. My name's Alex Gist. I work at the Human Early Learning Partnership, aka HELP, as the Middle Years Knowledge Action Lead. I'll be hosting the webinar this afternoon, or I think it's early evening for some of you. We'll be joined shortly by Dr. Kim Schonert-Reichl and a bit later by our special guests, Janelle, Zebedee, and Tricia Penny from the Central Okanagan School District of BC. I'd like to introduce Dr. Kim Schonert-Reichl. She's the Director of the Human Early Learning Partnership and also a professor in the Faculty of Education at UBC.
Thank you very much, Alex. That was great. I'm so thrilled to be here with all of you this afternoon, evening, and thank you so much for joining us. Really have some exciting news about MDI to share with you some of the recent findings, and I want to thank all of you who've signed up, who actually put in sort of the questions you had, what you hope to learn. It really helped me in thinking what kind of information I want to provide to all of you, but I will give you right from the start that I can't answer all of your questions. You had such great ones, but I've tried as much to address those as possible. But keep in mind, this is being recorded, and you will be able to come back to it if you're not able to listen now, of course, or come back to it if you want to share with others. So again, thanks so much. I just have to see. Okay, so I just want to start off and just say we are at the Human Early Learning Partnership, which is an interdisciplinary research institute at UBC, and our vision at HELP is all children thriving in healthy societies. We are very proud to say that for the last 15 years, we've had an Aboriginal steering committee who help advise us, guide us, and how we use our data, how we do our reports, and many other things, and really to give us that Indigenous perspective to guide us in our work, including with the MDI, which I'll talk about. We also, at HELP, our lens in which we look at child development is through something we call an bioecological model of human development that really takes into account that children live in multiple contexts, and there's multiple spheres of influence from anywhere from family, school, culture, and peers, all the way out to things like customs and law, policy, and all of that. And we really try and answer the question, what are those differences that make a difference? And we always use a risk and resiliency focus, really trying to figure out what are those factors that promote children's resilience. At the Human Early Learning Partnership, we also have a child monitoring system. So the MDI is only a part of a suite of assessment tools that we have to really understand child development, from the toddler development instrument, which is in development, to the childhood experiences questionnaire for when children enter kindergarten, to the early development instrument, which many of you might be familiar with, which is completed by kindergarten teachers when children enter kindergarten. And as you will see there, it's no longer just a glimmer in my eye. The YDI, or Youth Development Instrument, is actually underway right now, and this would be something that we would see with adolescents age 15 or 16. So my objective of really thinking about my presentation is really to provide information and tools for using your MDI school data to make positive changes for children in the middle years. And really at the very heart of it, the MDI it was developed really to help build a better world for children. And we told them that, and they were involved in the development as well. So I'm going to give you just a bit of a background on the MDI for many of you actually who are tuning in, are new to the MDI or just starting in your districts or thinking about it. Some examples of how to move to action, and then of course we have Janelle and Tricia who are going to give us their wonderful advice and examples of what they've been doing in the Central Okanagan School District and how they've been using their MDI data over the last few years. One of the key messages that I'd love you to take away with you is that the MDI results are reported in ways to allow schools and communities to move to action to improve student well-being and thriving. So just a bit of a, so why do we need the MDI? Aren't all the kids doing fine? So I want to give you a bit of a context of why we need information on children's well-being right now in this point in history. We know that there are increasing forces, larger forces at hand, in really concerning trends that we're seeing in around the world for children. increasing in bullying, issues around sleep, many children not getting the sleep they need, decreases in empathy and compassion, increases in mental illness, especially around depression and anxiety, and exposure to toxic stress, where children are not getting the normal part of stress of everyday life that we all have, but being actually having a number of stresses in their life that actually interfere with their ability to do well and learn in school and have positive relationships. And in fact, some of the research on toxic stress by Clancy Blair, Isabel Raver, and others is really showing that children who have toxic stress, who have multiple forces of stress, actually come to school and look like they have attention deficit disorder, when in fact they are having toxic stress that is actually interfering with something we call the prefrontal cortex, which is a part of our brain responsible for decision making and self-regulation. And so this is of concern. What also is concern is research now that's emerging that is saying that stress is contagious. Yes, emotions are contagious, and like the common cold or a flu, when you are around other people who are highly stressed, you catch it. And this is particularly true among children and adults. And some of our recent research with Ava Oberle and myself conducted this in classrooms and found that teachers who, grades 4 to 7, teachers reported the highest levels of stress and burnout, had children coming into their classes with the highest levels of stress as measured by their cortisol through saliva. So really showing that this stress is getting under the skin of children and influencing their ability to do well in school. So where do we go from here? You know, I'm thinking about the data. How do we promote children's success in school and in life? We know there's a paradigm shift that's happened in terms of a focus. Instead of just about decreasing ill-being, we're now focusing on well-being, as well as moving to a focus away from just going to intervention, waiting to children fail and then try and throw the life preserver out to them, to one of prevention, where we actually now equip them with the tools, the assets, the resiliency factors that will help them do well and stay afloat when they hit those troubled waters. Social and emotional learning, many of you have probably heard of this term. It's a growing movement around the world. I just returned from the first ever CASEL, Collaborative for Academic, Social, Emotional Learning Conference, with over 1,500 attendees from all over the world, 37 countries. And this is really now with a load of data really saying that, we now know that these skills, how you get along with others, how you manage your stress, how you are able to have empathy, are better predictors of your life success than IQ or academic achievement. So programs around the world, countries, even British Columbia, in fact, are now saying that the aim of education should not just be academic courses like reading, math, and science, but should include a explicit and specific focus on SEL, as we call it. So things like developing self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making are now becoming really integrated into the very fabric of education in an intentional way. And we know that has to be done not just in schools, but through family and community partnerships, larger school-wide practices and policies, as well as infused into the curriculum. One of the most, I think, pioneering, groundbreaking findings in recent years that has come from neuroscience, really showing us that, we used to think that social emotional characteristics were personality characteristics that were immutable, that you couldn't change them. Things like, empathy or self-esteem, that you couldn't change them. And we now know through neuroplasticity that you can teach these skills. They're malleable at all phases in life. And in fact, there are certain developmental periods where they might be even more malleable. And I would argue that is during the middle childhood years. Well, not just me arguing, there's many people who do. So just get on with this describing briefly the MDI. It's really using data to understand and improve child well-being in the middle years. It's a self-report survey completed online for children in grades 4 and 7, and it was developed really as a strengths-based assessment linked to health, well-being, success, and social emotional development inside and outside of school. It was developed through a collaborative process. Typically, these kinds of measures are maybe developed by, I'm going to use the ivory tower, researchers who are kind of out of touch developing these measures, but we really took several years to develop the MDI, realizing it had to be through a collaborative process, co-constructed with the stakeholders on the ground who helped inform us what they needed to know to help improve the lives of children. So we had, of course, we had scientific experts, but we also had educators, teachers, children themselves giving us feedback, community members, and even parents were involved in it. So we know that it's important to keep in mind that the MDI is really used to support policy, program, and practices, and it's not an individual diagnostic tool. So it isn't that you can give children this MDI and sort of give them a score based on their assessment. It's really meant to be a universal way to get a snapshot of a group of children. The focus of the MDI is middle childhood, as the title of the measure says, and we really focus on middle childhood because that, especially the ages 9 to 12, is a very critical, important transitional time in development. In fact, some say there's no other time in the life cycle, except maybe the first year of life, where so many changes occur in such a short time span. There's cognitive changes where children increase in their ability to use more abstract reasoning, social changes where there's an increase in connection to peers and especially self-consciousness around peers. Academically, their sense of competence really dwindles. And physically, there's those biological changes that occur when you have seen, if you have these children in your midst, I love that grade 6 to 7 or typical where the summer, kids come in and they're totally different after the summer break. Middle childhood is this time. It's a fork in the road, so to speak, and it's often where children's sense of themselves and sense of competence can really dwindle, their self-consciousness increase, and they could go on to a pathway of more risk, or they can go on to one of resiliency. So we really need to figure out what are those factors that will help get them on the right path to resilience. The MDI focuses on development of the whole child, inside and outside the school. As I said, multiple contexts in schools, families, neighborhoods, and after-school time. At the core and really the heart of the MDI is the notion that relationships are central. And in fact, what we know from 5 decades of research on resiliency is that the single most important protective factor for all of us are relationships, our supportive, caring relationships. It seems to be, as human beings, we are social animals. But I love this quote. It's one of my very favorites, that every child requires someone in his or her life who's absolutely crazy about them, from Yuri Bronfenbrenner. And it's really important to keep this in mind. Those relationships are key. And also the MDI looks at out of school time. Again, very unique to this measure. A lot of the measures in schools focus just on how children are doing in school, but we really want to know about their lives, in schools, at home, in communities. And really, again, something to really surface about the MDI and its importance, it's children's voices. We give them an opportunity to tell us about their lives in a way so that we can do something about it. And it aligns with the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, where children have a right to give their opinion and be listened to by the adults around them. So the MDI really, I have to say, of all the things about the MDI, it's probably one of the things that I'm most proud of in the terms of really emphasizing the importance of children and their voices, and that we can learn from them. It isn't just that we teach them. The MDI has 5 dimensions that are strongly linked to health and well-being and academic achievement, including social and emotional development, physical health and well-being, connectedness to adults and peers, school experiences, and use of after-school time. And as you see here, I'm not going to go through all these, that we have multiple dimensions on the MDI. The grade 4 has fewer questions, and the grade 7 has more questions, as you see the stars up there in terms of what we're measuring on there. But it has, and the ones that you see in orange are the ones that make up our well-being index, which I'll talk about in a second, and the ones in green are our assets. And I really want to double click on this notion of how we developed the MDI, we really wanted to identify those key aspects from 5 decades of research on resiliency that we know are actionable. So things like adults at school, eating breakfast, meals with adults at home are things that we can actually change, that we can help promote. The well-being index includes 3 dimensions. We really focus again on strengths. So our highest one is thriving or high well-being, and children who are reporting positive responses, at least 4 or 5 of those measures I mentioned, they're over to the left: optimism, self-esteem, happiness, absence of sadness, and general health. We have medium to high well-being and then low well-being, which you could put into the vulnerable category. So again, we use this infographic to depict how children are doing. And then our assets index looks at 4 dimensions: the idea of nutrition and health, connectedness to adults at home, peer relationships or connectedness to peers, and then organized activities. And just to give you a bit of a foreshadowing and talking about these, is the assets. If you think about the richness of the soil, the nutrients in the soil, these are things we can add to a child's environment. So the darker the color, the better, the richer the soil, the more likely those assets are found there. So we try and really use infographics and communication in a way that people understand. For those in BC, British Columbia, we have aligned the new personal and social competencies, part of the competencies of our new redesigned curriculum, with the MDI. And so there's, as you see here, there's a real connection between the MDI measures and these positive personal and cultural identity, personal awareness and responsibility, and social responsibility. And if any of you are familiar with social and emotional learning, as I mentioned earlier, the CASTLE framework, Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, we actually also have developed the MDI to align with these 5 dimensions. So you can look at under each of the 5: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So the MDI, actually, if your school is focusing on social and emotional learning, and maybe, for example, self-regulation or self-management, you can really look at these different measures and get a snapshot of how your students are doing, and then look at change over time in terms of your efforts. So it's something that we're really in wanting to develop further, this connection between SEL, because it is growing rapidly in BC at least, but I think across Canada as well. Just a bit of a snapshot. MDI, as you've seen, has had incremental growth every year, with this past year really being really growing quite a bit, and seeing that we now have data on over 100,000 students. And it's, I'm not going to mention all of these, but we have a number of districts across all of Canada who have been participating in the MDI over the last few years in our national rollout, and we're hoping to expand even further in that regard. So just thinking about now moving to action with your data, what we know is what is not assessed is not addressed. So, you know, if we don't know how children are doing, we could just say we think they're all doing okay. But of course, now that we have data, we have to do something about it. And it's so important to use data to shine a light, not as a hammer, so to speak. So we really need to say, what can our data tell us, and how can we move to action to help us learn more about children's lives? We have school reports for school reports, and actually school district community reports as well for our data. We have something called Discover MDI for some of you who are brand new to this, which we have a treasure trove of resources, workshops, videos, really serves as a companion, as well as a whole bunch of other, this just gives you some examples of MDI 101, data slides, key messages about the MDI. And then a lot of workshops that give you, you could just print off all the handouts, and as you're going forward, if you're trying to use the data to instigate action, there's, again, just a number of resources for you. You really want to start by understanding the MDI and what it is, and then, of course, share your MDI data with your stakeholders to figure out questions. How can you garner interest in the MDI data? Will data be used? Who's your audience, and what's the best way to share? As well as a key message. Again, I just put this in because a lot of people question, can the children actually give us honest responses on the MDI? And I want to say, after now over 10 years with the MDI, we have found consistent data. We have multiple studies, now over a dozen of published studies where we have shown reliability and validity for the MDI in both in the construction and in predicting other outcomes. So I just wanted to emphasize that as well. So really, the MDI is a way to understand students' perspectives, and it allows them to be our teachers, and it's not a test. So we really have to make sure that it's a voice of students. So just a couple of recent findings from our MDI over time. We find, first of all, that we found differences in well-being from 2017, 2018 to 2018, 2019, our grade 4s, and we see that, you know, this is 2017, 2018, where we see 42% of grade 4 were thriving and 38% of grade 7 were thriving, and this decreased to 38% for grade 4 for this past year and 33%. We're thinking that it might be due to the time of year. We changed the time of year from November till February, and if any of you are in schools, you know that could be a difference in how children are feeling, and teachers for that matter. As you see, over time, we've actually seen a bit of kind of stability and a bit of declining trends in some of our measures of well-being as well. So there's something larger at hand in terms of how children are doing on this. So you see the well-being index has been going down for grade 4, and you see a similar trend for our grade 7s across just the well-being index and across the different dimensions of well-being and optimism. If you look at that, there's been just some concerning trends in our society. We found that for 2018, 2019, that the majority of grade 4s and grade 7s do have a strong assets, and these have remained relatively stable. The one we find consistently low, this is just comparing grade 4 and grade 7 for districts in BC, is the nutrition and sleep. And I think to many of you this might not come as a surprise. And we also see there's a consistent drop from important adults from 83%, as you see in grade 4s, to 74% in grade 7s. And we could talk more about that. And this just shows a very similar pattern that we saw this past year in our assets as well. And also there's been changes in the number of important adults at school from 2017 to 2018 to 2018, 2019. Again, we believe this might reflect the change in the time of school year. We also had a slight change to how we ask the question for how many adults are important to you at school. And that may have reflected that change. But you see 2017, 2018, just let's click on the number of kids who say none, no one they have at their school. Grade 4 said 15% said no one, and grade 7 said 34% in grade 4 and 7. And what we see here is that increase for grade 4 to no one to 29%, and almost 50%, 49% for the grade 7. So it was a marked increase from last year to this present year for the important adults. And what we find consistently overall is that, guess what? Kids who have more important adults at school are better on almost every dimension of functioning, from optimism, happiness, self-concept. And an important note here is that, you know, people always say it's one important adult. We found a different trend. We actually have found that if you have 2 or more, you actually do better. It's almost like you have 1 in a spare or something like that. And we find that consistently over time for grade 4s and grade 7s. You'll see that staircase effect of 2 or more always being higher than just 1, or of course having no one is lower. So just some success for moving from data to action. Just your MDI data can provide a way to understand students' perspectives. It can be used to catalyze discussions about students' connectedness to adults at school, as I just demonstrated. It could be focused on a comprehensive school health plan by looking at nutrition and sleep and activity and a number of things in terms of children's healthy lifestyles. It can be used to understand and monitor change as you look at student social emotional learning, and it can be used to catalyze action in your community organizations. And these are just a few examples of how MDI data could be used. So here's one example of a district that used their MDI data to catalyze change in their after school time. Burnaby School District 41, they were very committed to looking at after school time in their community. Peter Dubinsky, who is the lead there, really wanted to focus, to bring those partnerships together. And so when they first got there, this is grade 4s, 2012, 2013, what they saw, as you see, is a lot of inequality, where you see there are some neighborhoods, this is mapped by neighborhood, and again, I said darkest means lots more of that asset there, and you see there's differences across neighborhoods, with some neighborhoods that have much darker color and others having a much lighter color. They worked to try and change this. This is 2015. However, they still have some inequality, with some places having a darker color and others having a lighter color. And again, they found this to be the case in their 2015-2016 data. And again, made very concerted efforts to make sure that they created equitable opportunities for students across neighborhoods. And what you see here is their 2017-2018 data, where they actually reduced the inequality so that basically every neighborhood had a high, with the children were high in that asset of after school time. Another district that moved to action was the Burnaby School District. That I think they were shocked. They got their data back from grade 7s, and 53% of their grade 7 said they have no one in their school who's important to them. They took it very seriously, said we must change this. We have to make an intentional, explicit approach to how are we connecting with our grade 7s. They reduced it quite markedly the next year, down to 38%, and again, the next year to 30% to no one. So you see a consistent growth in number of connected to adults. So here just shows you one piece of data and the catalyst it could be. So this last few minutes, I'm going to just give you, some of you have been waited, what are those 5 connections to kids? And so I'm going to just give you a couple of my highlights. So we know that important adults are very important to promote resiliency, important adults to promote connectedness to school, participation in after-school activities, school environment, effective involvement in school, and again, that one important significant adult at the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard, it says every child who ends up doing well has had at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive adult. And some of our own research has shown that connectedness to adults at school predicted well-being on the MDI, and is more important to well-being than socioeconomic status. So we even controlling for how the socioeconomic status of children, well-being, having that important adult was the most important factor. So here's some practical strategies. I slipped in more than 5, so you'll have to find out if you could find the hidden extras in there, the bonuses, okay? So first, the one is connection. Connection is key. Starting the day with a greeting, always address students by their name. You know, it's so interesting. We did a study several years ago, and we asked kids at a high school what did teachers do to show they care. Kids in honor roll, kids at risk, and kids average. Consistently, at the top of their list was a teacher who says hello to me in the hallway by my name. And now there's even research showing that teachers who stand at their door and welcome students with a smile, it increases their academic engagement by 20 percentage points and decreased behavior problems by 9%. So again, that simple act of just being present and acknowledging. And this is just a quick video. It just shows one teacher doing it, where children get to choose their good morning welcome, and they get to push a hug or fist bump. I love this one. It's so cute. I'm not going to show the whole thing, but certainly you'll be able to have it in the, I like the elbow one, actually. So strategy 2, look for the positive. You know, we focus so much on deficits in education and focus so much about trying to find out where kids are going wrong instead of looking at the positive, you know. So really, you know, praise a student's breakthrough of overcoming difficulties, stress positive aspects of students with other teachers, and even phone parents to give positive praise about students' improvement. We focus so much about, you know, parents feel if you're calling as the teacher, it's something bad, you know, so thinking about that. And we know so much, I love this one by the Dalai Lama, if each of us can learn to relate to each other more out of compassion with a sense of connection to each other and a deep recognition of our common humanity, and more important to teach this to our children. I believe that this can go a long way in reducing many of the conflicts and problems that we see. So really lead with compassion. Recognize that if educators are to effectively relate to students, they must be empathic, always attempting to perceive the world through the eyes of the student. This is just a study that showed that teachers who change from a punitive mindset to an empathic mindset through a very short two video online courses, it reduced suspension rates in half in a high school, inner city. And then the 2x10 strategy, many of you probably have heard of, where you find a student who might be giving you some challenges. I always say pick the annoying student and now have a positive conversation with them for 10 days, 2 minutes a day. I love that one. Get to know students and their lives inside and outside the school. Get to know them, who they are, what are their hopes, dreams, what are their interests, what do they do? There's 5 ways to show you care. Actively listen to them, get to their level, be present, ask them for their feedback and discuss their ideas, reflect on your own experiences of care, and using a compassionate approach to discipline, and really trying to understand what's underneath their problems and seeing them. And then it just gives you some other ones. I love this of being in nature, taking learning outside, gathering together to share food. I'm a big fan of the food sharing. Mindfully pause, taking mindful actions, and then talking circles, sit and share together. I think these are some really important ways to connect to students. And then these are just some questions for you to consider. What words would you hope your students use to describe you? What words do they actually use to describe you? And then finally, I have to say, you know what? It all comes down to self-care. You cannot be present and caring and connecting to your students unless you feel well and connected to yourself. And we know, so really my final message is to reach the children, care for educators. I don't know, some of you, I put this in just because I know it's late in the day or afternoon, and I thought I'd give you some entertainment. I just, a poor owl on the right-hand side, but really thinking about this idea and caring and understanding that teaching is or people who work with children, it's one of the most stressful of all professions, tied with nurses. And so really have to do that self-care and self-compassion for yourself. So first, to end, put on the mask first, and then on the children.
All right. Thank you very much, Kim. That was great. A lot of great information in there. So next, we're going to be joined by our special guests, Janelle and Tricia from Central Okanagan School District in British Columbia. So hi, Janelle. Hi, Tricia.
Hi there. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, guys. How are you?
We're great. Thank you.
All right. So Tricia Penny and Janelle Zebedee are teachers who are working with the Health Promoting Schools portfolio for the Central Okanagan School District. The Health Promoting Schools program is funded by the school district and Interior Health, which is the regional public health agency. There is a health promoting committee in the district, which includes parents, representatives from teachers unions, Interior Health, and the school district. The Health Promoting Schools program works to address issues around physical health and education, mental health, healthy eating programs, and community and social health programs in the school system. So Janelle and Tricia spend many of their days working with within classrooms and with students and teachers to help support implementation of the physical health and education program. They're also official MDI champions on our Discover MDI website, and they're also just joining us after a long day of a mental health in schools workshop. So thanks again, Janelle and Tricia, for joining us.
Betcha.
All right, so let's just start generally. I wanted to talk about, can you tell us a little bit about your district's history with the MDI and how you've used it in your role?
So we began with the MDI in the 2015-2016 school year, and we started off with the first year of surveying our grade 4 students and using that as some data that we could use to complement other data that comes in that's more academic, like the FSAs and such. And so we really, from a Health Promoting Schools Committee perspective, wanted to start tapping into what was actually going on for our students and their well-being and in their lives. And so it went through our committee for it took us probably a good year to get there and to put it on as something that we were going to use district dollars to support.
All right. And so how have you used the data once you got it in your role?
So we've appreciated being able to have both the district report and the school-based report. So in our role, every year when the data comes through and have all of the fantastic maps that are created throughout, we are able to initiate conversations at each school level, initially with their administrators. And then from there, we typically are asked to help support a staff meeting and share some of the data slides with staff. And in addition, it quite often looks like we're sharing with parents as well. And that just starts a conversation about what's happening at the school, what are we seeing in terms of trends as an entire district, and what are some strengths and maybe some concerns that the mapping generate for whatever community that we're working with them.
Okay, so we're having just a little bit of trouble here. If you don't mind speaking up a bit, that'd be great. All right. So, have you used any specific measures, or was there ones that you tend to use maybe on the MDI? So ones maybe like the important adults or the well-being index. Any of those that you've really gone to or found that you've schools or your district or your committee is more interested in working with?
Definitely, I would say the components of the well-being index are ones that at a school level we look at quite frequently. And then in our work with communities, we use those neighborhood maps very extensively. So those support a lot of our work with neighborhoods of schools and our community partners and our public health nurses and such. So we find the neighborhood maps to also be something that we go to quite often.
And can you tell us a little bit more about maybe how you've used them or why that some of those, like the public health nurses, have found those to be of interest?
Yeah, so our public health nurses, they work in different regions of our community. And so what we do is when we share the data with them, we tend to have them break out into groups afterwards, and we have them break out into their regional areas, and we provide them with community maps that they can look at what's going on in the area in which they're working. And then we provide them with the questions, and I think they're questions that are actually on Discover MDI website, which are what strengths do you observe in your maps, what challenges do you observe, and how can this data be used to support your work. And the conversations that come out of that are very interesting, and the questions that arise for further exploration are always interesting too. And I know what we saw with what Dr. Kimberly Schonert-Reichl presented earlier around the nutrition and sleep component of it, that concerned them, but that was also an area where they found they might be able to have some ideas to have some influence as well.
Okay, so it sounds like that work is still in progress?
Ongoing forever.
Yeah. So switching a little bit, in talking with you earlier, you mentioned that you've worked broadly with school districts, with all schools across the district, but you've also taken deep dive into the data with a few schools in your district. Can you tell us more about what the more intensive work with the school, what that looked like?
Sure. I'm hoping that you can hear me okay. I have a softer voice. For one example, we'll share at a local elementary school after receiving their grade 4 data. We spoke with administration as the initial conversation. We then shared the results with staff. And from there were some questions generated by the adults after their viewpoint of looking at the data of what does this actually mean for our kids. And of course, we can sit there and take as many guesses as we want to, but we wanted to hear from the voices of the kids of, okay, we heard this, tell us a little bit more about this. So for example, one of the conversations that came up was talking about school connectedness. Well, we needed to really ask the kids, what does connectedness actually look like for you? So how that unfolded is together with the administration, we were able to survey a wide variety of students from grades 4 all the way through 6 in this case, and facilitated focus groups throughout the day, asking some really specific questions about school connectedness, feeling safe at school, who are your go-to adults in the building, and then coming back together on a pro day and being able to really look deeper into the actual specific examples that kids gave and being able to identify some really concrete ways how we could move forward with ensuring that we're supporting connectedness within that building.
That sounds like really interesting work. So were there any of the findings of like from what the kids said that were surprising or confirmed some of your ideas going into it?
One of the interesting things that was slightly unexpected for us, it wasn't where we were intending the conversations to go when we were talking about connectedness and the feeling of safety, but the students from multiple groups that we were speaking with identified an area within the school in one of the washrooms and an area outside the school out in the back field that felt unsafe to them. And what was really curious about it was in later conversations with adults in the building, the adults didn't realize that the students found those places unsafe. And so it was really curious. And so we, took some looks at what they were talking about and where things were going, and some strategies were put in place to change what was going on in the washroom. I think they just painted over an area where they could see through, and they didn't like how it felt on part of there was a door that went to somewhere. And in the field, I think that they were able to find a way to open that area up and make it more visible and safer for the kids there too.
Oh.
I just have to jump in here. I love that. That's so amazing that you listened to the kids and then they saw you take action, and how empowering that was for them, and how it would add to the whole school culture where students feel that they can speak in a safe environment and that the adults listen and actually take action. So just huge applause to you for doing that.
Yeah, and it was so interesting. It was so interesting to us how many students verbalized that and how it wasn't any part of the communication that typically gets heard by the adults.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a great story. So were there any other interesting or surprising findings that came out of your work with the kids and those focus groups?
I think just overall, just love hearing their voices and being able to take what we read from the school experience report and actually just hearing them talk about it is just a joy to listen to their ideas and tell us, oh, here's what I think would be a great idea. Here's all the fun things that are already happening, and here's what we can do next to help even build that school culture. So it was just really, it felt an honor to have that time with them in a way that we typically don't get to sit down and have those extensive conversations.
All right, that's great. So if I'm working in the schools and I want to use my MDI data to run focus groups like what you're talking about, can you tell me a little bit more about what that would look like in practice?
So we sat down with the administration and created a plan. So we said we would be in the school for an afternoon, and they coordinated a small group of students from each of the intermediate classes that would come and sit with us for a select period of time in that afternoon that we rotated through. And we had our question set that we had developed that was same for all the groupings, and they rotated through, and one of us worked with the group of students and one of us did the recording of their responses while they were sharing.
All right, excellent. So, I think I've heard from a number of educators that sometimes if you're showing some of the data and like say around important adults or connectedness, and it's not as good, like the results aren't as good as you would want to see, that you might get some pushback from some of the teachers or other staff in the school saying like, oh well, how can we really trust this? Or did you get any of that?
What we've always shared with staff and school personnel that we've worked with is the fact that we don't know what the data means yet until we probe further with the students. And we acknowledge, make sure that when we're sharing it, we acknowledge all the hard efforts, positive things that are going on in the building that people are doing.
That last part again?
That we acknowledge.
So maybe say it one more time.
Thanks.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm not sure what you heard, but we make sure that we share all the positive things with them when we're sharing the data with them that we know that they are doing and that we can see happening in the school. And we share, so what does this mean when the kids say this? And that's our spring point to say, let's dig deeper and be curious about it. Not in a critical way, because we know we're doing lots of great things, but why aren't the students seeing it that way? So let's probe what that means to them.
Oh, that's great.
Perfect.
That's great. And so I think just maybe one last question I have for you all is what plans you have for using the data as you enter this school year?
We really feel like we would like to revisit hosting community sharing evening sessions where we invite community partners to be there to really delve deeper into looking at the community maps, recognizing what are the strengths, what are the challenges, and how can we all use this for the betterment of our community. And we did that a couple of years ago, and we're really feeling like we need to revisit that model because it was very powerful, and those small changes made some really big differences, we feel.
Great. And I did I lied. I do have one more question I wanted to ask you. So when you're working with the individual schools, how does the MDI, how do you work with them to use the MDI data to feed into their school plans?
Yeah, so a lot of our schools have plans that do have a socially emotional a trend in them in what they are trying to do. So we tailor the plans to guide them a little bit towards what is something that they would like to either continue to grow in a really positive way, something that is one of those strengths that they found, or is there one of their challenges that they would like to really use to focus the direction of where they're going with their school plans. And then sometimes we're invited to support an implementation day with them, do some learning with their teachers around that area, and do some exploring together around that.
All right, great. So I think we're gonna have some time for some questions. Janelle and Tricia, are you able to stay on the line for 10 minutes in case any of the questions are for you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if anyone out there listening, if you have any more questions, feel free to send them in to type them into the chat box. I think the first question that we have is around some of the differences between the connectedness to adults at school and the important adults. So Kim, were you able to talk a little bit more about maybe how those are a little bit different?
Yeah, I think that, and I think actually Tricia and Janelle brought this up, you know, you have to look at the student's perspective. So the number of important adults at school, so first of all, how students conceptualize what makes an adult important is, again, developmentally their experience. And so if they say adult might be important to them because that adult connects with them every day, or an adult might be important to them because that adult speaks the same language as they do, you know, so there's a host of other ways in which children are conceptualizing important adults. So it is very much along that standard, and so it's really trying to figure out what kids are using as important. In our initial research and development of the MDI before it, we found that children reported a number of things. I mean, the most common factor they identified what makes an important adult is someone who connected with them every day, someone who said hi to them in the hallway, someone who helped them figure out their problems, but even someone who taught them reading when they were in grade 1. So there are a range of factors to do with nurturing supportiveness. And then the supportive adults at school is really just double clicks on just a few aspects of support. So really looks at, you know, adults who believes you'll be a success. So these are two related but different questions. And so I think that, you might have students who have in a school, for example, who score high on, the number of supportive adults, but not so high on the number of important adults. And again, the data are not meaningful until you go and really dig deeper and remain curious with the kids and asking them, what makes an adult important to you? And you might be surprised, but how amazing to have that conversation and how them to feel that you're interested in what they have to say.
All right, thanks, Kim. So we have another question. So one of our audience members was asking that they're getting some, they have some questions from their staff around vocabulary. So like healthy students versus well-being versus wellness. Can you talk a little bit more about maybe what some of those differences might be, or where you see any similarities between those?
I'm not sure. So I guess I'm not quite clear of the question. So the language is what teachers are using, healthy students?
So getting questions from schools just regarding like how educators are using these terms.
I have to say I'm not that quite sure how they're using those terms. It depends. It's probably very context specific, whether they call healthy schools initiative, and some people might have a focus on well-being. I guess I'm not quite clear of what the question is. If it's about I
think so, maybe a little bit around some of the challenge or overlap in terminology that maybe is in the field.
Well, I think that, yes, I mean, the whole idea of, is it mental health? Is it mental illness? Is it social and emotional learning? Is it healthy schools? Is it, I think that's, yes, there's lots of terminology that's being used around and how important it is to have discussions around the language that's being used. I think that consistency, and yes, that different language can lead to confusion and people not sure what they're using. I don't know if that's what the question is.
Yeah, I think that.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
And then I think we have time for maybe one more question. So what would you suggest for a teacher, school, or district that thinks that they have a good relationship with their students in their school, but maybe their MDI, on their MDI data, students are reporting that many of them don't have important adults or only one?
Well, I think it's that interesting thing. I've done some research where we actually compare adults' perceptions of their support and students. And adults, it's very interesting. They overestimate how much they think kids are connected, So, but we don't know their life, So in some ways, the MDI is to spark that conversation about being curious. I mean, Tricia and Janelle really said this. Is a way to learn from the students, like the focus groups. And I think, what it has to do is an indication. And I'll just sort of end with this one story. I loved it. It was one of the teachers initially that did the MDI. She was in a grade 3 classroom, actually, and they got their MDI grade 4 results. This was in Vancouver with the first year of the MDI. And she was very disappointed with how many of these grade 4 said that they had no important adults. I want to say it was like over 50% or 60%, and wanted to know, like, how could the kids be thinking that way? So she decided that what she would do is go to a school in her same catchment area, just had very different results, where a great portion of the kids said they had 2 or more adults. And I gave her some reading to do beforehand, just so you know, and said, here's some things to look for. And she went and took her Pro D day and spent a day in that school, soaking in, what's happening in the lunchroom, what's happening in the hallways, what's happening in the classrooms, what's happening during recess, what's happening in the staff room. And really saw so many things that the school was doing differently in very subtle ways, greeting children, calling them by their names, really, every adult with a smile on his or her face, just a whole culture had been created around these adults. But when she really got to the core of it, the nub of it, and asked the staff, what's happening here, they came down to a conclusion. They said, we all get the adults, we all get along really well. And so this idea that really trying to look at the larger system in which these children are learning, is there something that is happening there? So I think, again, really thinking about the adults' well-being and and learning from the students as well.
All right, thanks a lot, Kim. Thank you everyone for your questions, and so we're going to be hosting another webinar. We'll be hosting 5 actually in total this school year. For those of you who will be collecting MDI data this year, mark your calendars for our next webinar on November 14th, 2019. You can connect with the MDI implementation team in preparation for administration of the MDI in schools. We'll also have another special guest to discuss how schools have used our Help for Students page, which is newly updated to support the well-being of students. So stay tuned for the rest of our upcoming webinars in the new year. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Enjoy the rest of your day, evening.